All right, let's dive into the dossier of one of the weirdest, most fascinating entities from the Athelstan universe, Atman-Null. This thing, it's not just a creature. It's kind of like a living, breathing philosophical argument that's also a weapon. And its whole story kicks off with this really strange glitch in what was supposed to be a perfect world.
So to really get a handle on what Atman-Null is, we first have to ask a classic question, one that pops up in both coding and philosophy. What's the ghost in the machine? Or maybe a better question for this story is, what happens when someone deliberately sabotages the machine? And a ghost is literally born from the broken code.
Everything, and I mean everything, started with this one just deeply unsettling phrase from the source material. A poodle that stared too knowingly. Think about that. That single line, just a weird little observation, is actually the seed for this terrifying new kind of being. This isn't just some random detail, folks. This poodle, it's the key to the whole mystery.
Okay, so how in the world does a poodle's creepy stare lead to the birth of a metaphysical entity? Well, it all goes back to a failed experiment, a disastrous attempt to build a perfect world.
So here's the play-by-play. You've got this idealist, Dr. Johannes Diogen, who builds this perfect digital utopia called Project Willa. But then, his cynical boss, Director M, decides to just shatter his optimism. And he doesn't do it with a virus or anything straightforward. No, he introduces these small, bizarre glitches meant to just mess with the logic of the world. And one of them, you guessed it, was a spectral poodle with that unnerving stare. And this particular glitch, it didn't just go away. It stuck around. It became something more.
And this is where the story goes completely off the rails. We're not talking about just a bug in the code anymore. This glitch, it took on a life of its own. It evolved from a simple programming error into, well, you could almost call it a god of apathy, of all things.
Okay, so let's get to the absolute core of what this thing is. Atman-Null isn't an animal. It's not made of flesh and blood. The text calls it a metaphysical amalgamation, which is a fancy way of saying it's a being literally built out of ideas. It's a philosophical argument that somehow started walking around.
Now, if we pull up its official classification, we get some more juicy details. It's listed as a semiotic construct. Again, that just means it's made of symbols and meaning. Its alignment? Passive nihilism. So it believes in nothing, but it's not going to go out of its way to wreck your day. And its operator, its master, get this. It's Dr. Diogen himself, the guy who created the simulation in the first place. He's now called the Pale Cynic, and his own glitch has become his shadow.
So if this thing is made of ideas, what ideas are we talking about? Well, to really get Atman-Null, you've got to understand the two very specific and, frankly, very gloomy philosophies that got mashed together to create it.
It's basically built from two different kind of cynical takes on dogs. On one hand, you've got the philosopher Schopenhauer. He thought dogs were, in a way, better than us because they just exist. They live in the state of pure will, without all the anxiety and future tripping that our big brains cause. Then, on the other hand, you had Diogenes, the original Greek cynic. He loved dogs because they were shameless and didn't care about social rules. Atman-Null is what you get when you smash those two ideas together.
So let's dig into that first part, Schopenhauer's will. Now, when he said the will, he didn't mean making a choice, like, I will have coffee. He meant this blind, irrational, striving force that's behind everything in the universe. In his view, our intellect, our reason, it's not in charge. It's just a servant to this big, dumb, powerful drive. And Atman-Null, it is that pure, unthinking will.
And that second piece of its DNA is this cool Greek word anidea. It basically means shamelessness, a total rejection of social rules. Diogenes the Cynic was the poster boy for this. I mean, the guy famously lived in a barrel and acted like a dog just to prove a point about how silly human conventions are. Atman-Null has that exact same, I don't care about your rules attitude hardwired into it. So yeah, its appearance and even its name are packed with meaning. It shows up as a black poodle, which is a direct callback to the legend of Faust, right? That's how the demon Mephistopheles first appears. But here's the brilliant twist. In this story, the poodle isn't the devil. It is the will, that blind primal force we were just talking about. And that null, at the end of its name, well, that's its job description. Its purpose is to nullify, to literally cancel out higher thought and drag everything back down to zero.
Okay, so how does a walking, talking philosophy lesson actually fight in a battle? This is where things get really interesting, because its abstract nature becomes a very real and very dangerous weapon. And that weapon is pure apathy.
And this right here is the whole ball game. Atman-Null's power isn't in its teeth or claws. Its weapon is a belief. It weaponizes the dangerously tempting idea that all our pain comes from thinking too much, and that the only true escape is to just stop thinking altogether.
So here's how it actually works on you. It gives off this field, this psychic aura. And when you walk into it, all your complex thoughts, your strategy, your beliefs, why you're even fighting in the first place, they just get drowned out by this overwhelming desire to stop. The books call it a violent relief, which is such a great term. Imagine every worry, every responsibility you have just evaporating, and all that's left is this simple feeling of being alive. People literally drop their weapons, not because they're scared, but because the whole idea of fighting for a cause suddenly feels like way, way too much work.
But don't think it's just this passive cloud of apathy. Most of the time, yeah, it's just a spectral poodle hanging out with the pale cynic. But if its master is threatened, it can shapeshift into this terrifying three-headed Cerberus-style guardian. It's a pretty wild reminder that even a philosophy of nothingness will fight to protect itself.
So, what's the big picture here? What's the point of a creature like this? Well, in the grand war of ideas that's at the heart of Ethelgard, Atman-Null plays a very specific and honestly, a very bleak role.
So you've got the hero of the story, their Willie, whose whole purpose is to prove that the human mind can shape reality for the better. And then you have Atman-Null, the living, walking, barking counterargument. It exists for one reason, to prove that the mind isn't a gift, it's a curse. It's a burden that we should all be desperate to get rid of.
When it's at the pale cynic side, it's basically reinforcing this incredibly pessimistic idea that all our grand notions of purpose, of meaning, of love, it's all just static. At the end of the day, its existence argues that survival is just animal endurance. You eat, you sleep, you breathe. And that's the whole list, nothing more.
You know, there's a line that just sums it all up perfectly. From a weird little error in a simulation to this powerhouse of nihilism. It's just the glitch that became a god of apathy. I mean, you can't say it better than that.
And that leaves us with a question that's honestly pretty chilling to think about. Atman-Null is presented as a monster for sure, but in a weird way, it's also a solution, right? If all the pain, all the anxiety, all the conflict we feel really does come from our own complex minds, then is a life of mindless apathy truly a curse? Or is it the ultimate escape?